Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today I'm doing something a little bit different, which is about the early history of Muslims in Toronto. This is just part one of possibly 2 or 3 future parts that I intend to do on the same topic. Now, if you're wondering why I'm wearing this fez hat on my head, also known as a funny red hat, it's because I want to get into the spirit of this video, into the spirit of the times that I'm going to be talking about and taking you through. Behind me here on Annette Street here in Toronto is the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto. You can't read that sign very well because it's covered by a tree. The significance of this small, quiet, little known, nondescript mosque in Toronto is a couple of things. Number one, it's actually the only European Canadian mosque in Toronto that I know of. Now, there are a couple of other Bosnian mosques, but the demographics of those mosques have changed very rapidly, especially in the 90s and then in the 2000s. So the Asian and African Muslims outnumber the European Muslims in those mosques now. But here at the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto, the majority of the people attending, the majority of the congregation is still a group of older Albanian men. The other major significance of this mosque, and it's amazing that people in Toronto don't know about this. I didn't know about this even though I've lived in this area my entire life. I never visited this mosque until about a month ago. The main significance of this mosque is that this association, the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto, is the oldest Muslim association in Toronto. That means it predates the Islamic Foundation of Toronto. It predates Tariq. It predates ISNA Canada. It predates MAC, Muslim Association of Canada. It predates ICNA Canada. The Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto is the oldest Muslim organization in Greater Toronto area. It was founded formally in 1952. And then it underwent a couple of changes in names. So in 1957, it became the Muslim Society of Toronto. And by the way, it's under that name, Muslim Society of Toronto, that they moved to the Jame Masjid. They bought the Presbyterian Church on 56 Boosted Avenue, which became the Jame Masjid, which is still the Jame Masjid now, but it's run by ISNA Canada. It was this organization, a Muslim Society of Toronto, that bought and founded the Jame Masjid in 1969. Then in 1972, they moved out of the Jame Masjid to this location at 564 Annette Street, and they've been here since 1972, which is an incredibly long period of time. And it was in 1972 that they changed their name back to Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto. Now, just to let you know, if you do live in Toronto so that you don't complain later, this mosque is not open for the 5 daily prayers because it does basically double up as a cultural center for older Albanian men. And so the community is just not large enough or active enough to open up for the 5 daily prayers. Some of these men actually commute from other parts of the city. So they do open up every day for Dhuhr prayer only, which means that on Friday they are open for the Jummah prayer. So they have the Jummah Friday prayers, and the khutbah is given in Arabic and Albanian. So while that might be a cause of complaint for some people or for the youth, you know, the place does fulfill a function, which is that, as I said, it doubles up as a cultural center and a social meetup place for some of the older Albanian men. None of those men, by the way, are from the original 1952 organization. That generation, of course, has now passed on. But there is one gentleman, there's still Mr. Badri. I won't even attempt to pronounce his last name because it's an Eastern European, very difficult name for me to pronounce. But Mr. Badri is still someone who comes here, and he's been here since 1966. So he's been with this organization from the time that they were located at 3047 Dundas Street West, which is where they were located from 1961 to 1969, you know, right before they bought Jame Masjid and moved to Jame Masjid. And Mr. Badri was kind enough that he lent me a bunch of archival documents, old letters, old documents from the archives of this association. And I'm going to be sharing some of those documents and newspaper clippings with you a little bit later on. So that was just to tell you a little bit about the background of this mosque. Now I want to bring your attention to a plaque that is right there under the number 564. There's some kind of a memorial plaque there. So let's move in a bit closer and have a better look. I'm going to read the plaque for you. What it says is, dedicated to the memory of Rajib Assim, passed away November 8, 1972, the founder of the Muslim Society of Toronto Incorporated, November 15th, 1957, which is when the society was incorporated. To tell you a little bit more about Rajib Assim, he was born in 1889 in what was then the Ottoman Empire, hence the fez cap. First of all, stop right there and pause and just think about that. A Muslim born in the Ottoman Empire, back when there was a Khalifa, when there was a Caliph of the Muslim world, back when Abdul Hamid II was still the Khalifa and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This man was born in that time. Rajib Assim was ethnically Albanian. He was born in what today is Albania. And then he immigrated to Toronto. Depending on which newspaper sources you go by, he came to Toronto in 1909 or 1910. Process that, digest that. And when he came in 1909 or in 1910, he is possibly, the first open Muslim that we know of in Toronto, the first open or active or practicing Muslim that we know of. And we know that because he founded the Muslim Society of Toronto in the early 1950s. And remember, being openly Muslim in Toronto in 1910 is not the same thing as being openly Muslim in Toronto in 2010 or 2020 or 2021. This was at a time when Catholics were seen as being religiously the other, religiously exotic. This is at a time when the Irish or the Italians would have been seen as exotic and as foreign. So at that time, Brother Rajib Assim was an open Muslim. And I was told by Mr. Badri that when Mr. Assim came here, like other Albanians at the time, which was an extremely small community, but like other Albanians at the time, he was initially involved in construction work, and that he even worked on the Prince Edward Viaduct, which is also known as the Bloor Viaduct, or that big Bloor Bridge, which was completed in 1918. So he and other Albanian Muslims worked on that bridge very early on. And because he was one of the only practicing Muslims, maybe the only open Muslim at that time, in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, everyone knew him, as that strange person, that Muslim, that Mohammedan from the Ottoman Empire. So if you're in Toronto, the next time you're here in this area near the junction, if you're here on Annette Street, why not drop by, pay a visit, if it's Dhuhr time, to the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto. They're very friendly, the Imam is very friendly, and also come here and take a look at the plaque. It's very nice that they put this here because it means that passerbys who walk by can see this and kind of appreciate this aspect of Toronto Muslim history. Now, the other thing that we know about Mr. Assim is that after he made a little bit of money in construction, in the 1950s, he with some partners opened up a small dessert shop or a candy shop in the High Park area. It was called High Park Sweets. So that's where I'm going to take you next. Okay folks, I'm where High Park Sweets used to be. It's now a pizza.
Pizza gives it to me in under 30 minutes, or it's free, right? Right! No.
It was with some difficulty that I was able to find out where High Park Sweets actually used to be. So it was 1723 Bloor Street West. I'm assuming it's still the same original building from the 1950s and 1960s because the buildings in this part of High Park are quite old buildings. So the apartment above the pizza is where Rajib Assim used to live, and downstairs of course was the candy shop / dessert restaurant High Park Sweets. And that apartment above what is now a pizza used to double up as an occasional irregular Muslim classroom. So in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, mid 50s, late 50s, if you wanted your Albanian Muslim child to learn a bit of Arabic, a bit of Quran, or to learn how to pray, that apartment there was doubling up as the only children's Muslim classroom in the whole of Toronto at that time. On the earliest documents of the Muslim Society of Toronto, on the letterhead of their papers, this is the original address that was there, 1723 Bloor Street West, before they bought the property at 3047 Dundas Street West. Now, Mr. Rajib Assim was known to be a bibliophile. He was a quiet, introspective, a reader and a scholarly person. So his apartment was full of books. So you could also say informally, this was the only Islamic library or Muslim book library at the time, not including, university libraries. And so that's it. Now it's a pizza. Nobody knows. People here in Toronto, Muslims here in Toronto, probably drive by it all the time without knowing the history of that spot. And the only consolation that we have is that pizza likely has some halal toppings available, like most pizzas do in Toronto. Other than that, no sign, no clue of its Islamic or its Muslim past. Folks, when I'm not able to meet someone from history, the next best thing is to be able to visit their gravesite. For me, that really kind of creates a connection with the deceased person. So we'll head over now to Glendale Memorial Gardens, or Glendale Cemetery, which is where Mr. Rajib Assim is buried. So let's head there next. Okay everyone, so we are now at Glendale Cemetery or Glendale Memorial Gardens at 1810 Albion Road. This is North Etobicoke in Toronto, and we are at the gravesite of Sidi Rajib Assim. If you live in the Greater Toronto area and you ever want to visit the gravesite, here are some of the details that I was able to dig up with some help. So Mr. Rajib Assim is buried in the Garden of the Good Shepherd, garden number 73, lot 549, space B2. But to be honest, all you need to do is just give the name of the deceased to the cemetery office. Now, Mr. Assim had a lot of different variant spellings of his name, because foreign names at this time did not have standardized spellings. Even today, many foreign names don't have standardized spellings, and that's why Muhammad and Ahmad and Ali even can be spelt in 2-3 different ways. Mr. Assim was known as Rajib, like R-E-G-I-P Assim, but also R-E-G-E-P Assim, also Rajab Assim, Reginald Assim, Reggie Assim, and to further add to the confusion, he was known by many of his Muslim friends here as Effendi Rajib Assim, which is just a title of respect that Albanians and possibly Turks give to elder people. But here at the cemetery, there's even a sixth variant, which is that in the cemetery office records, his name is spelt R-E-G-I-T, okay? So R-E-G-I-T, Assim, you can see it on the screen. And so that is the name that you would have to inquire about at the cemetery office if you want help in locating his grave. On the tombstone itself, it's spelled R-E-G-E-P, so go figure. Another thing that might help you here in the graveyard is that from where I'm sitting, you can see the view to my right. From where I'm sitting, you can see this solitary bench. That bench is actually in memory of Mr. Sayyid Ali Karim and his wife Mary Cole, or Mary Karim. And Sayyid Ali was one of the cousins of Mr. Rajib Assim. Mary was his wife, and they were both also very, very active in that early Muslim community in the Albanian Muslim Society, later Muslim Society of Toronto. So I said I was going to share some of those archives, some of those early records, some of those early documents that the gentleman at the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto was kind enough to lend to me. So here's the first thing I wanted to show you. This is Islam in Toronto, and this was just a small kind of historical record, or a short report on the early history of the Muslim Society of Toronto, which was founded by Mr. Rajib Assim. I'm not going to read it because it's a bit lengthy, except for the first paragraph, perhaps, which relates to our video today. So, Toronto has been and is many things for its Muslim residents. It was first a haven of peace and a place where new opportunities might be found for the earliest Muslims of this area. Many, like our honorary president, Mr. Rajib Assim, came here from Albania when Albania was striving for her independence from the Ottoman Empire, or from the chaos of the Balkan Wars of the early second decade of this century. And skipping a paragraph, in 1952, there was a departure from the previous politically oriented immigrant societies and groups in the founding of the Albanian Muslim Society. The principal figures in this organization were the late Mr. Sami Karim, Mr. Naim Salih, and Mr. Assim. This group celebrated the major Islamic festivals in rented halls, but there was still no regular prayer hall. That is not until 1961. So this is an original document from the Muslim Society of Toronto in the 1960s. The last update in this booklet is 1966. That's where the story ends. So this is an original document of theirs from 1966, which I have to return to Mr. Badri at the Albanian Muslim Society of Toronto. Now check this one out, guys. I'll put this on a photo for you so you can see it better. This one I think has been scanned by somebody, because I believe I saw this on the internet somewhere. But this is the original newspaper clipping, folks. This is from April 13th, 1959, from the Toronto Star. Or is it the Globe and Mail? I'm not really sure. But this is April 13th, 1959. And this is about Eid prayers, which at that time they didn't have a regular prayer hall. So this was done at the Club Kingsway. The Club Kingsway was a club near the shores of the Humber River on today what is, I think, South Kingsway. Toronto Muslims mark Feast of Ramadan. Kneeling in prayer. Members of Toronto's Muslim community met yesterday in Club Kingsway to mark the Feast of Ramadan, ending a 30-day period in which they fast during day and eat only at night. There are about 400 Muslims in Toronto. The Muslims were led in prayer by Muhammad Tahir Mastoor of Bombay, Pakistan. I don't think there's a Bombay in Pakistan. Now studying in Toronto. He acted as imam or leader as the group of 50 prayed in unison for guidance in struggling against temptation and ignorance. Now I'm going to put a square there around Mr. Rajib Assim, so you can see him there in 1959 praying the Eid prayers. And it was usually, out of humility that he wouldn't lead the prayers, because he's actually the one who founded that society, the Muslim Society of Toronto. By the way, the gentleman who owned Club Kingsway, Syed Ali, I believe, or Baba Karim, one of these two cousins of Mr. Rajib Assim, they are also buried right here to my right. So they're all in the same vicinity here. This is again an original newspaper clipping. This one is from the Globe and Mail, Saturday, February 22nd, 1969. Toronto's first mosque to open. So this is when the Muslim Society of Toronto moved from their Dundas Street West center to Jame Masjid. And Jame Masjid is what most Toronto Muslims know or consider to be the first mosque in Toronto, the mother mosque. And it was the first mosque in the sense that it was the first place of worship that was permanent and open for all 5 daily prayers. So before that, the Islamic Center that the Muslim Society of Toronto ran under Mr. Rajib Assim did not have the 5 daily prayers. They didn't open up for 5 daily prayers. In the early days, they simply didn't even have enough people in Toronto to do that. But in 1969, they moved to Jame Masjid. This is the Jame Masjid of Toronto, in case you haven't seen it before. Back to the cemetery. And Jame Masjid, of course, accommodates the 5 daily prayers. So regarding that 1969 opening of Jame Masjid, I want to read to you from a paper that I saw in the documents that I was shown. There was too many papers, so I couldn't take all of them. I took photographs of some of them, and I'm just going to read this one to you. I was really struck by this description here. I have to hold my iPod sideways. The official opening of the Jame Mosque on February 26th was well attended. When our honorary president Rajib Assim cut a ribbon with a prayer and led the way in for the first Isha prayer. Since he was overcome by emotion at this happy and significant event, Mr. Assim turned over the leading of the prayers to Dr. Beg. I want you to imagine this man who was born in 1889 in the Ottoman Empire, who came to Toronto in the 1910s when there were no other Muslim. Imagine what went through his mind. Imagine what went through his heart when he cut that ribbon, opening up the first proper, dedicated, full-time mosque in Toronto. So it must have been a really significant and a very moving event. So these papers are in no particular order. This is from much later. This is from 1974. This is 2 years after Mr. Rajib died. This is a letter from the office of the Prime Minister. So this is from Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was Justin Trudeau's father, right? And it says, I am happy to once again extend my warm greetings on the occasion of Eid al-Adha. Through Abraham's act of faith, we are all made aware of the courage, hope, and belief inherent in our religious ideals. To the Muslim community of Toronto, my very best wishes, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And that's his original signature there. This is from 1974. So I better take care of that. Here's some kind of original ticket or invitation, or just some kind of information pamphlet that was given out in regards to the opening of Jame Masjid in 1969. Opening of the Jame Mosque of Toronto, Canada. All Muslims and friends are invited to the inauguration of the Jame Mosque, 56 Boosted Avenue, 1 block south of the Bloor West and Dundas West intersection, Parkdale, Celebration Week. And there you have all the details for Eid al-Adha, and then the next day Juma prayers. March 1st they had an Eid dinner, and the gentleman who's mentioned there at the bottom right, Murray Hogben, he was a Canadian Muslim. He is a Canadian Muslim. He's still alive. He lives in Kingston, Ontario, and he was quite active in the Muslim community in Kingston as well too. Here's the final document or paper that I'll share with you here. This is the obituary for Mr. Rajib Assim, and this was in the Toronto Star, Thursday, November 9th, 1972. So again, this is the original newspaper clipping for the obituary of Mr. Rajib Assim. On the back is ads for Honest Eds, of course, for those who remember that. So I'll read this. Rajib Assim, 83. Lifetime honorary president of the Muslim Society of Toronto since 1967, died yesterday on the Muslim Eid al-Fitr, a day of celebration at the end of a month of fasting. Born in Albania, he fled to Canada in 1909 after an unsuccessful Albanian attempt to win independence from the Turkish Ottoman Empire. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was involved in that nationalist struggle, but there was a lot of political chaos and trouble at the time. He was regarded as the religious leader of Toronto's Muslim community since the Albanian Muslim Society was formed in 1952. When it enlarged to become the Muslim Society of Toronto in 1957, he was elected president and remained in active leadership until 1964. He could read Turkish, Albanian, and Arabic, and spent much of his time reading letters and books at a table in his Bloor Street West restaurant. He and his partners operated the restaurant High Park Suites for many years before it was taken over as a site for a branch bank. Usually quiet and scholarly, when elections were called, he would leave his books and campaign strenuously for the candidate of his choice. A bachelor, he leaves 2 cousins, S.B. Karim and Sabri Karim. So brothers and sisters, these are just some of the documents. I mean, I literally saw more than 100 papers, easily, probably a couple of 100 papers. But these are the perhaps the most interesting documents and newspaper clippings that I wanted to share with you, and that pertained directly to the life and times of Mr. Rajib Assim. Now, because he remained a bachelor, obviously he doesn't have any direct descendants. So it's up to us, the Muslim community of Canada, and more specifically the Muslim community of Toronto, to keep his legacy and his memory alive. And if you're coming to Glendale Cemetery for the burial of someone else anyways, then please take a minute out, take a minute or two to pay ziyarah to the grave of Mr. Rajib Assim and pray Fatiha, make dua for him and make dua for the other Muslims, the early pioneers of Islam in Toronto from the 1950s and the 1960s. Make dua for them that Allah multiplies their good deeds and overlooks their mistakes and their sins and grants them the very best in the akhirah. Mr. Rajib may not have had physical progeny of his own, but I feel that in some way he is the spiritual father of Toronto's Muslims. If you could take a DeLorean time machine back into the past and you arrived back in Toronto in the 1910s or in the 1920s, in the 1930s, and you were looking for another Muslim, you were looking for a Muslim brother, you were looking for someone who knew how to perform janazah prayers, you were looking for someone who knew how to perform the nikah ceremony for you, this is the man you would have to have searched out in 1910, in 1920, in 1930, in 1940. In the 1950s, if you asked any Muslim in Toronto, who is your leader? Who is the leader of Toronto's Muslims? This is the man that they would have pointed you to. In the 1960s, at least up until 1964, if you asked who is the leader, who is your leader, who is the leader of Toronto's Muslims, again, this is the man that they would have pointed you to. So please visit the grave, and for those of you who are not in Toronto, i.e. the majority of you, pray for all of the Muslims who have gone before us. And when you do that, take a minute to specifically remember, take a moment to specifically remember Mr. Rajib Assim, the spiritual father of Toronto's Muslims. Toronto, which is now a city that is on the North American Muslim map. Mr. Rajib Assim, who cut that ribbon in 1969 for Jami Masjid, who was overcome by emotions, and that tells you something about the man. When he says that, when he said in a CBC interview that this is the happiest day of my life, that tells you something about the man. That tells you about his priorities. That tells you about what was close to his heart. What was close to his heart was always Islam. It was always the deen. That Rajib Assim, when he cut that ribbon, he couldn't have imagined that one day on my street alone there would be more than 400 Muslims. He couldn't have imagined that in that same Toronto one day in the mid-90s, Muslims would pack the Sky Dome for Eid prayers, the Sky Dome which is now called Rogers Centre. At that time, Mr. Rajib Assim couldn't have imagined that in that same Toronto, Muslims would one day pack the Maple Leaf Gardens to see Sheikh Ahmed Deedat in 1994. That Rajib Ali in 1969 couldn't have imagined that in that same Toronto in the 2000s, Muslims would be packing the Metro Convention Center for 3 days straight for an Islamic conference. May Allah grant Sidi Rajib Assim some portion of the reward for all of these Islamic activities that take place in Toronto today. Jazakumullah khairan for watching. Thank you very much. I'm not done with the Muslim Society of Toronto. There are more interesting tidbits and things to come, so stay tuned. Remember to subscribe. Please share this video with all of your friends. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
In Canada since 1928.
So you've had quite a bit of experience with the Muslim community here.
For just a short period of time, because before then I was very busy and I didn't engage in the Muslim Society activities. But since 1963, I become very active. And the reason that I did become very active was because of my cousin here, that he was very, very anxious to have a mosque in the city of Toronto. And that was the ambition that I want to fulfill just for him and for the rest of the community in Toronto.
In 1928, when you came, how many Muslims were there here?
I think there was a very, very small amount. I would think about how many?
About 40.
About 40 people.
This is a great day for you, isn't it?
We're happy to say never had happy, never felt so happy in all my life.